This is the 55-210mm f4.5 to 6.3 E-mount lens for crop sensor Sony cameras. This is Sony's most budget telephoto lens that they sell, and that is exactly how this lens performs. This lens is pretty much the perfect first telephoto lens if you own a Sony a5000, a6000, or Sony NEX series camera. Like I said, this is Sony's most budget telephoto lens. This lens retails at about $300, which of course is a fraction of the price point of Sony's other telephoto lenses like the 70-200 G Master or the 200-600. Those lenses are completely out of reach for a lot of people, especially if you're just getting into photography or video and you're just looking for some sort of longer length lens than maybe your kit lens or any other wide angle lens that you have. And this lens is basically perfect if you're that type of person. So if you've been around my channel for a while, you probably know that I'm not really about the technical specs and sharpness and that sort of thing, and I'm more about just how lenses and cameras perform and what you can do with them. And so in this video, I'm going to show a lot of example photos I took. I actually took this lens on vacation with me, got a bunch of pictures there. So that's mainly what I'm going to be showing you, but of course I will go over the main technical specs if you're into that as well. However, I want to be upfront with that. If you want to know, the sharpness of this directly compared to other lenses and all the technicalities of it, there's probably other reviews out there for that. I just like to talk about what you can actually do with this lens and what it's like actually using these cameras and lenses versus, testing them in a lab setting or something like that. But let's go ahead and get the technical specs out of the way of this lens real quick. So this lens, like I said, is a 55-210mm lens. However, it's meant for Sony crop sensor cameras like the a6000, a5000, and Sony NEX series. And so this lens is actually about an 82-315mm full frame equivalent, which means this lens has an insane amount of focal range. You can really do anything in terms of the portrait all the way up to like wildlife bird photography range. However, you can't really do anything wide. Like if you're in a room or even anywhere indoors, it's gonna be pretty hard to find a use for this lens. Next up, the construction of this lens. It's pretty plasticky, and just by holding and feeling this lens, you can definitely tell it's not the best construction. It's definitely not fully made out of metal. You can tell they cheaped out in the construction a little bit. There's a little bit of play in the zoom ring. The rubber on the focus and zoom rings isn't that good quality. It's all kind of plasticky, and you can really tell this is a budget lens, which also means this lens is not weather sealed at all. There's no gaskets, there's no sort of weather sealing with this, which of course in its price point is completely understandable. However, during my use and my testing on vacation, I got a little bit of rain on it and I didn't have any sort of issues, but I definitely would not recommend getting any sort of liquid or water on this lens at all because there's no sort of weather sealing with it. And like I was talking about earlier, this has a 3.28 foot minimum focus distance. So for most things, it's not gonna be a super big deal, especially, when you wanna zoom in this far and get a telephoto lens, you're probably pretty far from stuff. But I wouldn't use this for something like product photography, indoors or something like that. This is more of a zoom in really far if you're really far away from something type of lens. This lens also has OSS or optical steady shot built into it, which is Sony's in-lens stabilization. And so whether you're taking photos or recording videos, it's gonna smoothen everything out, which is really good with a lens this long. You're not gonna get a bunch of those jitters because of how zoomed in you are. It's gonna smooth that out a lot. And that works really well, and I'm pretty happy to see that even in this budget of a lens. And then a few more quick things. This lens weighs 12 ounces. It's super light, which of course makes sense with this really plasticky build quality. I mean, this is a great travel lens just because of how small and light it is. It's on the a6000 right now, and you can see kind of the size comparison. If I zoom in all the way here, it sticks out a little more, but it's still pretty compact and super, super light. So there's no issues with that, with carrying it around to wherever you want with you. This is a great lens for that because of how light it is. And then it has a 49mm filter thread up front, which is pretty normal for smaller lenses like this. And then I already said this, but it costs about $300. However, if it's on sale, maybe on Black Friday or for Christmas or something, you might be able to get it cheaper. And of course, used, it's gonna be a lot cheaper as well. And so that basically wraps up the main features and specs of this lens. Like I said, there's nothing special, nothing crazy about it. You pretty much get what you pay for with that $300 price tag on this lens. However, we're gonna move on to photos and some examples because I wanna show you that you can still get some awesome looking photos with this lens. Definitely don't get it in your head that, you need a G Master like $2,000 or $3,000 lens to get good looking photos. because that is definitely not the case. You can get awesome looking photos with this lens. Let's go ahead and show some photos that I took with this lens on vacation, and then I'll talk about some of the downsides of it and give my recommendations at the end. So like I said, I brought this on vacation with me and I really loved how light and portable it is. That was probably my favorite part of this lens. However, pretty much the biggest downside is going to be the aperture on this lens. So the maximum aperture you can get is between 4.5 and 6.3, depending on your focal length. So at 55mm, the maximum aperture is f4.5. And if you zoom all the way into 210mm, the maximum aperture you can use is f6.3. So because of this, especially when you're zoomed in all the way, you're really going to need to up your ISO or lower your shutter speed in order to keep your shot relatively bright, because the f6.3 aperture really doesn't let in a lot of light, and even f4.5 doesn't let in a whole lot of light unless of course you're in like full sunny conditions. And I really noticed this issue when I went into the forest and it was the middle of the day, but there wasn't really any direct sunlight. You were kind of under the trees, and you know, to my eyes, like, it was still daytime, it was still pretty bright, but I had to bump up my ISO quite a bit more than I would have liked to, just because I had to stick at that f4.5 to 6.3 aperture, and I couldn't open up to, like, you know, f1.8 or f2.8 or something like that. And so of course, you know, the higher end Sony lenses like the 70 to 200 G Master does open all the way up to f2.8 at any focal length. And so it's gonna let in a lot more light, it's gonna be able to separate the foreground from the background a lot better. And overall, I mean, there's just so much more versatile being able to open up your aperture like that. And so that's where this lens has a pretty big downside. This lens is best used in really bright conditions where you're not gonna have to worry about the f-stop as much, and you're going to be able to stop it down to f6.3 or, you know, f8 or something like that without having to worry about it. In terms of sharpness, chromatic aberration, that sort of stuff, again, you get what you pay for with this lens. For a $300 lens, it's not going to be tack sharp. You know, the edges are going to have some fringing and not be as sharp as the center, of course. And overall, you know, until you stop down a few stops, it's really not going to be the sharpest thing in the world. It's not going to be tack sharp. There will be chromatic aberration. You know, I definitely noticed a little bit of all that with this lens. You know, compared to the other lens that I brought with me on vacation, which was the Viltrox 24mm, which I also have a review if you want to check that out. I mean, that lens was noticeably sharper than this lens. Like, in every photo I took with it, you know, you could tell the difference in sharpness, that this is just a little soft in pretty much everything you do with it. But like I said a million times, that shouldn't stop you from using this, and you can still get awesome looking photos, which is why I think this is the perfect first telephoto lens for pretty much anyone that has a Sony crop sensor camera. I mean, it's the perfect way to get started with something like wildlife photography, bird photography, anything that you're gonna need a telephoto lens for, you know, even portraits. This is such a great lens to get started with. You know, everything about it works good. The autofocus, good enough. It's not perfect, you know, not as good as other lenses, but the autofocus is good enough. It still does pretty much everything you need it to. It just might not be as fast as a lot of other lenses are. Sharpness, good enough, but obviously not tack sharp. The build quality, it's fine, it gets the job done, you know, but it's not gonna be fully made out of metal, weather sealed, you know, super rugged like other lenses are. So basically, to wrap this up, this lens will do pretty much everything you need it to for a beginner or a first telephoto lens without really doing anything else on top of it. But that's gonna wrap this video up. Thank you so much for watching. If you wanna see more videos like this in the future, go down and hit the like button and subscribe to my channel, and I will see you in the next video.